Welcome to Confessions of a Parent Coach. I'm Coach, a mother of four, and potty talker, Ann Kaplan. This is the podcast where I confess something from my own parenting and coaching life, teach a lesson around it, and answer your questions. Even we parenting experts are far from perfect, and the real magic happens when we get down with all that imperfection. We get into the gritty side of parenting here, so earbud up and dive in.
Welcome into another episode of the podcast. I'm excited to be here again with you this week. And we're talking about today is losing your audience, that moment when you know that you are talking to a brick wall and your child is not listening anymore. In our family, we call that losing your audience. And there's lots of ways in which you can lose your audience. Mike and I used to talk about losing your audience before we ever even had kids. We would talk about, if you show up in a conversation like really aggressive, or, you don't respond to what the other person is saying or whatever, you lose your audience. Like, they're not going to listen to what you have to say, right? Well, that happens like twice as easily and twice as frequently when we're talking about parents trying to get through to their kids. So we're going to talk about that today, losing your audience. And the reason why we're talking about losing your audience today is because this whole week, actually the last couple of weeks, I have been really focusing in on these topics that are about communicating and connecting with our kids in preparation for the Words That Work workshop that is coming up on Sunday. You have two chances to attend, actually. I like to make it so that you have some choice. So you either can come Sunday evening or you can come Monday at noon. So you can get this amazing information no matter what. So if you haven't already registered for Words That Work, it is free. So I can't imagine why you'd pass it up. It's an awesome workshop that I've taught several times before, and every year I just kind of add to it and improve it and tweak it, all about how we talk to our kids. I'm going to talk to you about the words that work, the words that don't work, what we have to do so that we can actually be connected to our kids and maintain that relationship, and understanding that our relationship with our children being healthy is the number one protective factor in a kid's life, which means that it's really worth it to get this part of parenting right so that it's okay if we're not nailing it in all the other departments, right? Like, this is the number one gold star, like North Star is what I meant to say, not gold star. That was a Freudian slip. Now you know that I'm constantly seeking gold stars in my life. But that is the number one North Star that is this huge protective factor in our kids' lives. So we're going to talk about it at the Words That Work workshop. We're going to talk about all different types of communication tools, how to actually show up in a good energy in our conversations with our kids, and how to still achieve what we need to achieve in terms of behavior and discipline without sacrificing our connection and our relationship with our kids. So the link to register to that workshop is in the show notes. I really encourage you to go for it. And if you just want to know what the link is, it's just my website, AnnKaplanParentCoach.com/words that work. Pretty logical. So get on there and book it. It's free. Can't wait to see you Sunday or Monday or both if you decide to come twice. And we're going to have some time there for some live Q&A. I like to do live coaching. I really try to make my workshops pretty interactive. There's a reason why I call them workshops and not like webinars or talks or whatever, classes. You're going to learn a ton, but it's really important that we are actually we need to be engaged and connected with each other. I don't want to lose my audience when I am giving that workshop. So to bring it back to losing our audience, let's talk about it. So, oh, hang on. I'm going to mute myself for a second because I am about to sneeze. Hang on a minute, everybody. Okay, I'm back. A little peek behind the curtain for you, since I'm the one who records everything and edits everything for myself. Like, sometimes I'm like, I need to pause the recording because I'm going to sneeze or cough or something like that. So there you go. That's the real deal. You know me. In case you were wondering if I was like all fake and putting on airs, now you get to see what's the real deal. I'm bringing it 100% for you guys today. Okay, so let's talk about this losing your audience, and always start with a confession. So this confession is more of a story, or maybe it's a confession that's I'm confessing for somebody else, because yesterday it just so happened that I had such a great example of this that I got to watch unfold before my eyes. Like, when you're co-parenting with somebody, you have these opportunities to really kind of be like a fly on the wall and watch how your co-parent is parenting, not because it's about your co-parent at all, but because it's just a great example to see parenting in action and see, oh, okay, that was really effective, or oh wow, that didn't work. And I see it. Right. So that was just like this little glimmer of a moment that I had yesterday, because three of our four kids had their well visit appointments in the morning. So I am in the car driving the all three of us. I like to get all of them done at once. So when we go to the dentist, like we take over the entire dentist's office, because there's like six of us getting our teeth clean at the same time. And the same thing when I take my kids to the pediatrician. We've got like three different like PAs or between the rooms and everything. So we're driving down to the pediatrician's office for well visits, and my husband calls me on the phone and says, "Put me on speaker. I want all the kids to hear me." And he proceeds to really express to them how frustrated he is that the house has been left not picked up. And he has been working pretty hard to keep the house clean because his mom was coming into town and all of this stuff. And it was really, really upsetting to him. And so he really laid it all out there. It was a pretty classic, dad lecture of like, I work really hard. I don't need to be picking up after you guys from now on. The stuff you leave out, I'm just going to, put away, and you're not going to see it for a long time, and et cetera, et cetera. And I watched. Now I'm driving, so I wasn't like turning my head to the back seat to stare at them. And I could see them in the rearview mirror, and I could hear the energy in the car. And it was really interesting because at first the kids were kind of defending themselves, like, I didn't do anything, or you only put out a few things for me to clean up, or I did clean up after myself, or whatever. But pretty quickly, Mike was really venting at that point, and pretty quickly they just stopped talking. And by the end of the call, they were just sitting there in silence, just kind of like taking it, like just listening to Mike, express himself and lose his temper or whatever on the call. And then that was it. And he hung up. And so it was really, it's like I said, very rare. I'm not telling you the story to throw Mike under the bus, because I promise you he has just as many stories that he could be telling you about me, where it's like, I was sitting there and I got to watch how Anne completely mishandled this situation. And I could see and pinpoint the exact moment that it went south and everything. But just to really take advantage of the fact that it's very rare that we have a moment where we really can be a fly on the wall and see, how things progress. And that was my experience yesterday, was to be able to pinpoint like, oh, yep, he lost his audience. He lost his audience right there, right when he wasn't listening and was just, kind of defending his point and not open to their points, and, all of these things. And that is exactly what we're going to be talking about today: how we can lose our audience in conversations. And this can feel really tricky, because a lot of times the things that we're trying to deal with or accomplish, and this is such a great example, the things that we're trying to deal with and accomplish in our conversations with our kids is addressing their behavior. And there is a problem, or there is something we need to get across. And we are kind of feeling a little bit stuck of like, okay, what are the right words I can say that's going to actually get through to you? And also, if I can't, get through to you, then what am I supposed to do instead? And so we're going to talk about that today. So I just kind of want to think about for a minute, how do we get into these situations where our words are just totally falling on deaf ears? And the kind of mic drop soundbite that I want you to take away from today is, people usually stop listening when they stop feeling heard. What that really means is we lose our audience when we become bad audiences ourselves. We're not listening, so they're not listening. And this isn't just kids. I mean, all people are like that. What's the point of just even participating in a conversation if you feel like you're what you're saying isn't really going to be taken seriously. You don't feel seen, you don't feel heard, right? So, your kid is probably stopping listening to you. You probably lose your audience the second your child stops feeling heard. So, what that means is that in order for us to stay in a good communication with our kids, what in order for us not to lose our audience, we need to be good listeners. And that is really, really hard because when we're emotionally charged up, when we feel like we really need to achieve something with this conversation, when we disagree with the person we're talking to, we have a really hard time focusing on receiving information from them. We have a really hard time listening. Instead, we are just pushing all of our energy forward in like kind of like this bulldozer tidal wave of convincing, proving, compelling, and then also venting because there's emotions that run high, right? So, obviously, one of the things we're going to be talking about during Words at Work is like, how can you actually come to the conversation set up for success already? Like, how can we come to this conversation without an agenda? And I know what you're probably thinking is like, how am I supposed to not have an agenda around this thing that's a problem that my child needs to make better choices around, like picking up their stuff around the house? And we're going to get to that. I'm not even going to give that away today in the podcast because that's not what this episode is about. But I do promise you that we are going to talk about that in detail at Words at Work. So come to the workshop. But if it's important for us to be good listeners in order for us to maintain and keep our audience, let's think about what our kids' experience is of us when we are communicating without listening, when we are communicating with that agenda. Um, how would you feel if, every time you tried to talk to somebody, they got in your face or towered over you or, really didn't give it up to you, meaning like they negated everything they said with a but, like, I can see you're trying really hard with your homework, but you still don't have the grades that you need to have. That kind of feeling that we have when we're talking to someone who's not really doing a great job listening to us is, you know, really understandable that our kids feel that way too. Or how about if you're talking to somebody who talks nonstop without giving you a chance to speak or explaining to you in detail how you got yourself into this mess or, raising their voice at you or assuming they know how you feel without actually hearing it or asking you, or doesn't seem interested in your ideas or perspective. Like it is no surprise that kids are not into a conversation like that. And so we need to really think about how we're coming to these conversations and how we can do a little bit better in terms of listening. Listening is the bottom line, right? So listening doesn't just mean taking turns and talking, although that is part of the equation, but also paying attention to the nonverbal stuff our kids are telling us, making sure that we're not spiraling while they talk. If you're dysregulated and centered, one of the best things you can do, and we're going to talk about this at Words at Work, and we're going to talk about that whole like spectrum of communication thing. If you haven't heard that, go back and listen. It's a few episodes ago. We're going to talk about this idea that like if you're triggered, activated, spiraling, super upset, you can't have that conversation then at all. There's nothing else you can do. You can't be a good listener. You need to center yourself. You need to take some space. Good listening also includes reflection back to them, meaning, I heard you say this and this. Did I understand that correctly? Did I get that right? Um, and that also is about not just showing I heard what you said, but also I'm making sure that I understand you. Those are two things that are separate, but so, so important. It also means that when you see that you have lost your audience, because that can happen. And I'm going to talk in a second about losing your audience when it's not because of the way you're showing up. Good listening means recognizing when you've lost your audience so that you don't have to put your kids through the experience of just being talked at long after the moment has passed and you've lost your audience. So let's talk about what I just said, that idea that you might lose your audience, not because of the way you're showing up, but just because something's going on with your child. Like it happens all the time in conversations where the thing you're actually talking about, even if you're doing a great job talking about it, is just too much. And I'm going to give you another example. You get a mini, so you got a confession from me representing my husband and confessing for him something. But now you're going to get a second confession that is for me. And this is, a lot of people already know that several years ago, my eldest son, when he was a freshman in high school, was really struggling, and he ended up going to wilderness therapy. And towards the end, we have like this moment where the family comes for a few days out to the camp where they are. And we have basically like a few days of family therapy, like in the wilderness. And when we were there, we were all talking with my son, and I was reminding him about an interaction that had happened before he had gone to therapy between him and his brother. And at first, he was like, that never happened. And I was like, well, honey, sorry, but it did happen. And he turned to his brother and said, did I really do that? And his brother said, yes, you did. And then Elijah acknowledged, like, oh, okay, well, if you guys are saying I did that, I really did do that. And you could tell that it was kind of a body blow to him to realize, like, I behaved the way that these people are saying, and I didn't even realize it. But I did not notice that had that was it for him. He couldn't absorb any more in that moment. And I kept going. And I was like, yeah, see, so that's why I think it's important that we talk about this, this, and this. And now that you see that this really did happen, you can understand why we're upset or concerned about such, such, and such, and such. And I just kept talking. And the therapist, um, well, there are two therapists with us, and Elijah just got up from the conversation and walked away. And he went and sat on a rock with his back towards us, and he was just devastated. And one of the therapists went with him. And the other therapist turned to me and said, he is flooded and you kept going. And he walked me back through it. And he's like, did you notice on his face, when his eyes went a little bit unfocused, when he stopped looking at people in the eye, when his shoulders slumped after he got acknowledgement from his brother about his behavior? And I said, yes. And he's like, right from that moment, he didn't hear one more word that you said, because he was so flooded with emotion about this thing that had just, occurred to him. He had just realized that he's unable to continue and stay present in that conversation. And that was a mistake on my part. Like, I had seen those things, but I hadn't honored those things. And I'll tell you, if I'm being brutally honest with myself, there are two reasons why. Number one was I really wanted to get this point across to him. I I just felt like this is my moment. He's open, he gets it now, like, take advantage of it while before the window closes, kind of thing. So I really saw it, but I chose that, the thing that I wanted out of the conversation was more important, but I really wanted to go there. The other reason, if I'm really honest, is because I was venting my own stuff. I was so upset and concerned. I might have been using great words. I wasn't yelling at him. I wasn't shaming him. I was saying all the right things. The words I was saying were good and fine and appropriate. But what was behind them was, finally, you see what you put me through, and I got to get this out. And those two things clouded my ability to recognize, like, I've lost my audience and it's time to pause, because we're not going to get anywhere with me continuing to talk right now. And in fact, not only are we not going to get anywhere, my continued talking is probably going to make this situation worse. So think about these ideas of losing your audience. Think about how you show up. Are you being a good listener? Are you being reflective? Are you coming to that situation calm? Are you taking space when you're not calm? Are you confirming that you understand what your kid is saying back to them? That's one piece of the puzzle. The other is, are you noticing when the topic itself that you're talking about is something that might need to be dealt with in baby steps? These conversations might be to be continued conversations. Like, pay attention. Pay attention to how you are listening. Pay attention to the feedback you are getting from your audience. As I can tell you, in the car yesterday when Mike lost his audience, it was a very palpable moment where all three kids just they gave up. They gave up being present. They gave up actually being in a dialogue and just sat there until it was over. And the only good thing that can come out of that, the only thing that can come out of that at that point was maybe just getting more stuff off your chest. But, you know, in terms of actually getting through to the person you're talking to, we lose it. There are very clear moments when that's the end of this conversation because one or both of us cannot keep going right now. And learning the skills that we're going to talk about at Words at Work is going to help you prolong that moment when you lose your audience, make it less likely that you lose your audience. But that still is going to happen, especially if you're talking about tough stuff. And so being aware that losing your audience is just a thing that happens sometimes, and being able to recognize when that happens and making good tuned in choices when that happens is a part of the story too. So we're going to learn how to keep your audience as long as possible. And we're also going to talk about how to handle it when we have lost our audience. I hope that's helpful for you today. I really enjoy recording these podcasts. I hope I will see you at Words That Work. It is one of my favorite workshops that I do all year long. And that's all. I'll see you again next week, everybody. Bye.
The episode is over, but there's more waiting for you. You can grab my free workbook, Getting Kids to Listen the First Time, that walks you through the fundamental principles I teach all of my clients and applies them to this very universal parenting challenge. So if you're sick of repeating yourself all day long or just want to learn more about my style, you'll definitely want to go to bit.ly/kidswholisten. And if you're ready to work with me, let's meet. Set up a free call at bit.ly/Kaplan call, and let's create an action plan that gets you exactly where you want to go. And of course, links to all this goodness are in the show notes. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.